Yes. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm going to put up the screensaver for a minute for folks on YouTube or people who come in late.
Okay.
Uh, that will. This is our title today, Walking with the Mystics, and our presenter is Sharon Grant, who's with us here in Louisville, and she's going to lead us through her journey walking with the mystics. These three mystics today, Thomas Merton, uh, Teilhard de Chardin, and Julian of Norwich are going to be the beginning. And then we'll come back on Father's Day to do three more great feminine mystics, including Hildegard of Bingen, whose music we heard today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Sharon. I'm going to turn off the screensaver, and you're on. Take it away, dear.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much, Joe, for introducing me. And first of all, I want to say thanks to all in the community who have been praying for George these days with the fall that he had and the also the eye surgery that he had. So we really appreciate that. And so as I begin my talk, my sharing, we're calling it Walking with the Mystics. And I'd like to begin with a wonderful quote that came my way as I was preparing for this talk. And it's a quote from Dostoevsky. And these are his words: "Love all that has been created by God, both the whole and every grain of sand. Love every leaf and every ray of light. Love the beasts and the birds. Love the plants. Love every separate fragment. If you love each separate fragment, you will understand the mystery of the whole, resting in God." So I think this speaks to what I want to convey or what I want to share in these reflections on the mystics. I want to say that the mystics have really been um, my inspiration or my ability to actually stay in the church. I am a Catholic, but many parts of that Catholic tradition no longer speak to me, and especially some of the structure that is there. But it's through these mystics that I can see and that I have been fed, really. And I have felt that this is the heart of what our faith is, and this is the heart of what the message of Jesus is. So that's why they are so important to me. And so, just for an introduction into um, what mystics are, what contemplation is, I want to share a couple of quotes for you. And this comes from a book that's entitled Into the Silent Land, and it's by Martin Laird. And so it's in the introduction, and this is the way he introduces his reflections in the book. "We are built for contemplation. This book is about cultivating the skills necessary for this subtlest, simplest, and most searching of the spiritual arts. Communion with God in the silence of the heart is a God-given capacity. Like the rhododendron's capacity to flower, the fledgling's for flight, and the child's for self-forgetful abandon and joy." So that this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the depth of our walk with God. And another source that I want to quote as kind of laying the groundwork is a quote from The Cloud of Unknowing. The cloud of unknowing is a very classic source for spirituality, for meditation, for contemplation in the Christian tradition, certainly. And I think it is respected probably, by others as well. And an interesting thing about this book is that the author is unknown. Some people have tried to come to kind of a guesswork of saying who it might be by. We really don't know, except he is a person of the 14th century. And in the 14th century, we had so many mystics and so many people who were walking this path of a deep union with God. And so these are the words of the cloud. He says, the mystics teach contemplation as a practical spiritual exercise that through grace unites an individual soul with God. I want to back up here. This is the introduction to the cloud. Okay, this isn't the words of the author as such. Okay, the mystics teach contemplation as a practical spiritual exercise. Their goal is audacious, nothing short of total union with the Creator and Savior. They teach contemplation as a spiritual craft that can be learned by anyone. This outbreak of devotional literature has one theme. Contemplation is synonymous with God. Sorry about that, my phone rang. And this is a quote from the cloud itself. So the author of this book in the 14th century says, start practicing contemplation and watch how this spiritual exercise makes a difference in your life. When contemplation is genuine, it's nothing but a sudden impulse coming out of the nowhere and flying up to God like a spark from a burning coal. I love this quote because it tells us that contemplation isn't something we get, something we go after. It's something that we receive. And he says, when it happens, it's nothing but a sudden impulse coming out of nowhere. And so you say, well, then how does one approach this? I think one approaches it with an open heart and wonder and the willingness to be surprised, probably. So another quote from the cloud is this. And so the author here is saying, I know you'll ask me, how do I think on God and as God, and who is God? I can only answer, I don't know. Your question takes me into the very darkness and cloud of unknowing that I want you to enter. Reach up to penetrate the darkness above you, then beat on that thick cloud of unknowing with the sharp arrow of longing, and never stop loving, no matter what comes your way. So this is so wonderful, isn't it? That the way that he says it, and the heart of contemplation is longing. So he says this, I just want you to go with your question, into that cloud over you with the heart of longing that might reach it to love. Okay, so that's kind of a foundation of the tradition of what I want to say and of how it has affected my life. So the first mystic that I want to talk about is Thomas Merton. And I feel sure that all of you are familiar with Merton. He was born in 1915, a year after my own mother was born. I remember that date that way. And then, of course, he died in 1968. Very, very young in my estimation, 57 or so years old. So Thomas Merton who entered the Trappist monastery in Kentucky. And after he entered, so one of his life desires actually had been to be a writer. And more than a writer, he wanted his poetry to be known. So when he entered Gethsemane, he knew that he had to give up the writing, which he did. But then he was told, after he had been there for a short while, I want you to write your story. The abbot of the monastery, of course, had been listening to Merton, talking with him, guiding him, and he said, I want you to write your story. So there Merton was being told under holy obedience to write after he had given that up, actually. And so what he wrote has become one of the most popular books of the 20th century and now into the 21st. And that was The Seven-Storey Mountain. Well, I read that book when I was in high school. And in reading the book, from at that point, that had an impact on me. I mean, all of my teachings in church and Catholic schools was with me, but that book touched me in a different way because as I was growing up, going through Catholic schools, one of our nuns told us at one time, pray to know your vocation. And I listened to that, and I prayed every morning when I went to communion, oh God, help me to know and follow my vocation. And when I read the Seven-Storey Mountain as a teenager, as a high school student, that nourished the desire in my heart to follow what God was calling me to do. And at that point in my life, I felt called to enter religious life, which I did. So one of the quotes from Merton that you're all probably familiar with, and which I love very much, is this: My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. How many of us have not felt this in our lives? I don't care who we are. At different times in our life, whatever stage we're in. He goes on to say, I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does, in fact, please you. So it's messages like this that have really touched my heart. And what I hear in these words of Merton is the importance of desire or longing. The cloud of unknowing expresses it as longing, but the desire of our hearts, and to get to the deep desire of our hearts sometimes takes a life's journey. Another quote from Merton that I want to share with you is from Dancing in the Water of Life. And this is what he says here. He says, the great joy of the solitary life is not found simply in quiet, in the beauty and peace of nature, song of birds, etc., nor in the peace of one's own heart, but in the awakening and attuning of the heart to the voice of God, to the inexplicable quiet, definite inner certitude of one's call to obey him to hear him, to worship him here, now, today, in silence and alone, and that this is the whole reason for one's existence. This makes one's existence fruitful and gives fruitfulness to all one's other good acts, and is the ransom and purification of one's heart that has been dead to sin. So I think this speaks so much of the importance of listening to the heart, of moving to the heart, and being open to that constant awakening that God calls us in different ways at different times in our lives. And I've certainly experienced that. Another quote from Merton that I think is very appropriate for this talk is this, and this is a quote from New Seeds of Contemplation. Contemplation is life itself, fully awake, fully active, fully aware that it is alive. It is spiritual wonder. It is spontaneous awe at the sacredness of life, of being. It is gratitude for life, for awareness, and for being. It is a vivid realization of the fact that life and being in us proceed from an invisible, transcendent, and infinitely abundant source. Contemplation is, above all, awareness of the reality of that source. It knows the source obscurely, inexplicably, but with a certitude that goes beyond reason. So I think this way of speaking of contemplation, for me, it opens it out. Contemplation is not just sitting in our prayer time. It's not just sitting in meditation. It's not just the prayers that we may utter. Contemplation grows out of the wholeness of our life, and it is manifest in our actions. So some of the mystics that I'm going to refer to, and the next one definitely, it was in the actions of his life that he really came to that full awareness of the depth of his own inner connection to the divine source. And so for all of us, as we go about our day-to-day lives and day-to-day work, I think it's important to honor the fact that whatever we do can be part of that heart lifted to God. So we can be kind of busy about lots of things sometimes, but that's still part of the total gift. Okay, so Merton, as much as I love him, so I kind of feel like Merton is one of these soul companions of my life, sort of a mentor. And that's the way I really regard all of these mystics. They're my mentors. And their spirits are with me. I've been praying to them to be with me in this talk because I get a little nervous when I have something that I'm to be talking about. And I sure hope that they are. I trust they are. Okay, so the next mystic that I want to refer to is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And he was born in 1881 and lived until 1955. Pierre Teilhard. So I'd love to just speak more about him, but I have to remember the time here. But just briefly, he was a French Jesuit, entered the Jesuit order. He was born in France, grew up in France. He was the fourth of 11 children, and grew up in a part of northern France that was a more rustic part of the country. And his father, and he had wonderful words to say about his mother and his father. Uh, and his father, however, was a stricter disciplinarian sort of person. His father was a scientist himself. And one of the things that Teilhard got from his father was this love of nature. His father would take them on hikes all the time. And so they were in rough country and they were hiking in the mountains and so on. Where they lived was in sight of some of the mountainous area in France. And Teilhard says from the time he was a child, he was fascinated by rocks. Imagine that, rocks. But he apparently collected them, and he was just as a child, this was a great interest that he had. So he became a scientist himself, not only a theologian, but a scientist, a paleontologist, a geologist. And he was teaching actually in Paris and was teaching theology. And his writing, and I believe it was this book that was put out, that it was called The Divin Milieu. His writing and his teaching were questionable to the authority in the church. And they silenced him teaching. He had to stop teaching. And after he stopped, it was a great turn in his life and his real sadness. He loved teaching, but he listened to what the church asked of him. He stopped teaching, but he didn't stop writing, not to publish. The works were not published until after his death, but he continued writing. Thanks be to God that he did. Okay, one of the things from Teilhard. So when I came in contact with Teilhard when I was in the novitiate at Nazareth, and I found this little book, The Divin Milieu, and it was like it opened up a whole other understanding of church, of belief, of God, of just that whole sphere of who we are even. It opened that up for me. Before that, I was in this kind of box, this Catholic box. I had gone to grade school and high school in Catholic schools and entered the religious life at Nazareth. And it was really kind of at that point in our formation, it was really kind of a more austere kind of life. One of the things I learned when we entered that we had silence all day long, except for in the evening, we had a little bit of speaking time in the evening where we could talk with one another, have fun, walk, and so on. But this, so at any rate, I was in that Catholic box. And when I read Chardin, it was like the world is so much bigger than the way we define it, than any of these kinds of disciplines or practices or whatever. So I'm going to read for you here a quote from Chardin. First of all, I have to say this to lay the groundwork. So Chardin was a scientist. He ended up then actually doing amazing work in excavating digs in China, and some of those were those figures of army figures that one of the emperors had done, had all of these things done, and had these figures buried. And actually, he did that because the practice in the prior time was the army of a Chinese emperor had to also die and be killed at the death of the emperor. And so this emperor did not want his army to do that. So he had these clay figures, or I'm not sure what they were made of, made, and they were to be buried at his death. And so this was a find, a very amazing archaeological find, and Teilhard worked on that. But in his life, so what he had come to is that the very stuff of all matter is shot through with the divine energy. And so this kind of states that, right, in his own words. He says, matter in whom I find both seduction and strength, you in whom I find blandishment and virility, you who can enrich and destroy, I surrender myself to your mighty layers with faith in the heavenly influences which have sweetened and purified your waters. The virtue of Christ has passed into you. Let your attractions lead me forward. Let your sap be the food that nourishes me. Let your resilience give me toughness, and let your robberies and inroads give me freedom. And finally, let your whole being lead me towards Godhead. What a powerful awareness. What a statement. So Chardin expresses embracing the world, embracing everything in the world. And he sees all of it as shot through with the divine. And he also speaks of the cosmic Christ that manifested in the whole of creation, the whole of the universe. So this one other quote. He says, Lord, since with every instinct of my being and through all the changing fortunes of my life, it is you whom I have ever sought, you whom I have set at the heart of universal matter. So this kind of insight, this man was a busy man he was teaching at times. He was working in an archaeological dig. He was doing study reports on rock specimens from around the world. He was a known scientist. And in the midst of all of that, this was his mystic heart. This was the depth of his being and his understanding and this surrendering to God. So he opens up for me a whole kind of greater space of the movement of my God, or of an attempt to know who God is. And so with great gratitude, I have to Chardin. There was another quote here, but I'm not going to read that because I think I'm taking your time. Okay, so the third mystic that we want to take today is Julian of Norwich. And Julian of Norwich, her dates, I had her dates down. Her dates were, at any rate, she was in the 14th century. She was an English, she was, what's the right word? The right word won't come to me right now, but she was an English woman. And this will give you a little background here. I think I want to do that. The way we know her is that she wrote what she called her revelations of divine love. And it was called in the Showings. Now, I will tell you that there was a theological reason why the church insisted it be called showings rather than revelations, because the church had this kind of definition of revelations ended with the end of the New Testament. And Julian called them her revelations. And I honor that. And I think we have modern day revelations. So her showings is what this knowing her comes from. So she was a writer, a mystic, and a spiritual guide. And she is the first known English woman whose written work survives, because she wrote in the dialect, not in Latin. She was born, oh, here, I've got her date here. She was born in 1342, 2 years after Chaucer, and it is believed lived well into her 70s. She was an anchoress, so she wasn't a religious, she was an anchoress. That is, a woman who chose to live a life of solitude and prayer and lived in a small 2-room apartment adjoining a church. An anchoress was not necessarily a nun. Some could have been, but she was not. Julian's anchor hold or cell adjoined St. Julian and Edward Church in Norwich, and there she lived and saw those who would come for spiritual guidance. Julian lived during the 100 Years' War. She survived 3 outbreaks of the plague, which reduced the population of England by half. She passed through a period of great social unrest, as witnessed by the peasants' revolt, and saw the Western Schism, which divided the Roman Catholic Church, and the rise of the middle class in cities. None of these are reported in her book. For Julian, God alone mattered. She wrote these revelations because she had experiences. She calls them her revelations from God, and they were, you could say they were maybe visions, maybe they were heart openings, but this is what she wrote about, and she struggled with these revelations that came to her in some of the things that were being taught in the church. She was a faithful church member, but she would say, how does that fit with what God has let me know, is what she would say. Okay, so one quote from Julian, and one of the things that comes through constantly is Julian's love. And that's a mark of all the mystics. It's the manifestation of love. That's what we're called to. Julian says, God is all that is good, and as to my sight, and the goodness that everything hath, it is he. In her prayer, she sometimes referred to Jesus as Mother Jesus. She says that our true Mother Jesus, he alone bears us for joy and for endless life. Blessed may he be. So he carries us within him in love and travail. So she pictures Jesus as one who has birthed us, as it were, the one who cares, nourishes us. And so another quote from Julian is, she says, "For I saw most truly that where the Lord appears, peace is received and wrath has no place. For I saw no kind of wrath in God, neither briefly nor for long. For truly as I see it, if God could be angry for any time, we should neither have life nor place nor being." So she came to this awareness of the understanding that this God that she knew deep in her heart was totally of love, that there was no wrath in God. And she goes on, there's a place in her writings that I couldn't find as I put my finger on it. I was trying to go through that for this talk. But she says something at one point about, I know that the fathers teach that there is punishment for sin, and that the soul could be damned to hell. But I know, or God has shown me, that none will be lost, that God will not allow. God in his love, every being, all of our being manifests a spark of the divine. God doesn't want to lose any of that. This is the way I think of it, and the way I understand Julian. Another quote, and so in all this contemplation, it seems to me that it was necessary to see and to know that we are sinners and commit many evil deeds, which we ought to forsake, and leave many good deeds undone, which we ought to do, so that we deserve pain, blame, and wrath. And despite all this, I saw truly that our Lord was never angry and never will be, because he is God, he is good, he is truth, he is love, he is peace, and his power, his wisdom, his charity, and his unity do not allow him to be angry. And so Julian, though she lived in the anchor hold and lived, I'm sure, with a lot of meditation, solitude, as she tells us about, um, she also was open to the people who came to the little window in her cell, and she listened to their stories, and she offered them spiritual guidance. And the one story that's told of her that I love, and this story we know the story because of another writing during that time that was done. And this other woman knew Julian, and she tells the story that there was a woman who was greatly bereft, and her son had died, whether through violent means or through natural means. And the woman was a widow and had lost her only son, and she couldn't be comforted hardly, or was very, and she came to Julian, and as Julian listened to her, and she said, come into my cell. Julian took her into her cell, prepared, she says, you need rest. She let her sleep, prepared soup for her, and fed her, and kept her there for days, for I don't know how long, until the woman's had a return of her strength and she could go back to her normal life. So Julian was doing things, She was not just there in prayer. She was reaching out to other people and active in that way. And I'm going to conclude with this little story that you probably heard if you know anything about Julian, and it's the story of how she talks the hazelnut. And she said, and so God showed me something small, no bigger than a hazelnut, lying in the palm of my hand, as it seemed to me, and it was as round as a ball. I looked at it with my eye of understanding and thought, what can this be? I was amazed that it could last, for I thought that because of its littleness, it would suddenly have fallen into nothing. And I was answered in my understanding. It lasts and always will, because God loves it. And thus everything has being through the love of God. In this little thing, I saw three properties. The first is God made it. The second is that God loves it. The third is that God preserves it. And the final quote is one that carried me through. Julian is so important to me because her inspiration carried me through one of the most difficult times in my life when I was let go of work that I was doing in ministry and did not know where I would go from there. And these words of Julian became my mantra for a year, for 2 years. I said it every day. I said it every time I was ready to plop into depression or something. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and thou shalt see thyself that all manner of thing shall be well. And I'm going to say that again as we close. All shall be well, and all shall be well. And thou shalt see thyself that all manner of things shall be well. So thank you. That concludes our thought for today. And I'm going to invite all of us now to move into a time of silence where we move to the heart and listen to what God is speaking to our hearts today. Thank you.